When it comes to climate change, we have to look for examples that are leading in the world in the idea of tackling climate change. Where are the best examples of that? Is it the corporate leaders and the UN flying around in jumbo jets and getting around in fancy yachts, belching out pollution, saying everyone how to be? Or is it the people in Nigeria and Africa where I wholeheartedly congratulate and we all should support planting trees and turning desert into regions where in the future, hopefully, this biomass they're creating, this biomass then takes CO2 out of the air. And these are real greening jobs. If, for example, the only idea of being a greening job is putting windmills up and solar panels up and driving EVs, because such a small amount of people in the world can still afford EVs, regardless how popular they become. There are millions and millions of cars in the world, and billions of people will never be able to afford an EV as it is. Although that can change because the idea of an EV might change itself. In being involved, I ride an electric bike myself for most of my journey, so it can change if people have a different mindset about what it is they're involved with in regards to acting on climate change. It's not just talking about it. It's not just a political item or a fashion statement or something else to have a solar panels on your roof, an EV in your garden, and how many trees have you planted? And this is it where there's a lot of the UN has meetings and the climate change they have these meetings in Glasgow, and they're very powerful and very wealthy people who do this. And one wonders if there's no sort of equivalent, there doesn't seem to be equivalent equation in the social organic part of doing something about climate change. There's an equation. There should probably be a balance. Everything can be resolved down to some sort of equation or formula. And how you do that does then determine how the future is to some degree. Now we know these formulas are used by certain people to examine all sorts of things about population and stuff like that. We've seen them on videos on YouTube. But so, what is it about? Where is the equation in regards to sustainable social organic economics that looks at sustainable organic horticulture as a parallel to the corporate part in climate change, that is solar and wind and lithium and all the switching, all the cobalts and all the minerals, the industrial part of the climate change revolution, if you like, industrial revolution. But where is the grassroots? Where is the equivalent, other than in Africa? Where is the equivalent in the West of, in particular, of when, for example, every time there's a bunch of windmills shoved up, there should be also, for each windmill, there should be 1,000 trees or something like that as an equivalent, because the windmill is to reduce the amount of emissions because you're producing power through the wind, although there has to be some emissions where that's made in China, where to produce those wind generators, because the metal, steel and aluminium, is difficult as yet to process them in such mass production as required to fulfill the corporate agenda in that respect, and not be creating either using a baseload power, nuclear power, or coal or gas somewhere. It's difficult as yet to see how mass manufacture is done with in a constant, because you can't have a manufacturing process where the wind dies, your manufacturing process is stopped. The processing is stopped. It doesn't work. Excuse me. So this is the contradiction and a little bit of hypocrisy when I hear people from the UN lecturing places like Australia, which I totally and utterly agree that Australia's done nothing about climate. It's pumped windmills and all that sort of stuff. But windmills should also be used to take where it's possible, where the agronomy, that's the amount of humidity in the air, the amount of moisture content in the air, is enough available there to take some water out the air and feed that into a organic biomass that is part and in parallel, tandem if you like, in regards to dealing with climate change by creating real green jobs, social, organic economics, sustainable, social, organic economics, because that then would allow people, the people should be employed, not just sticking windmills up, but sticking trees in, and all the variety of organic biomass that takes CO2 out of the air, and also creates a biomass. It creates this greenery. You're actually doing real green jobs. I've heard so many politicians say, "Will be lots of green jobs in Australia," and I haven't seen any green jobs. There are a few volunteers putting trees in here and there in councils and stuff like that, but there is no mass effort by politics or the corporate sector or any part, or the retirement sector, that's the retirement funds or anything like that. None of them seem to be willing to put some percentage of that funding into the sustainable, social, organic economics, which would be of employing people, using either new water created by the wind from solar taking water out of the air, or recycling the town wastewater and reticulating it through the soils and creating an organic biomass where the birds and the animals can thrive in there, and so on, and also with some organisation grow an organic food supply, because if you're going to monopolise food supply, so it becomes a monocultural food supply, people just eat a few basic lines of food, and you do not have the biodiversity in the food chain itself, you're breaking down the food chain, you're breaking down the basic essential organic evolution of the planet. And so, to me, as a long-time environmentalist, I don't have a washing machine, never had one. And you can question that all you like, but I never had one, I never thought they were necessary. And it, to me, is a long-term, and I was brought up to respect nature. Without an equivalent respect of nature, there is no real intent. It doesn't seem to me intent by the big end of town, the corporations. They're not really. It's not personal to them. It's everyone else must act, but they can fly around in jumbo jets and get around on big boats and stuff like that, when they can all have meetings over there like this, using this Skype or whatever they use face-to-face by a screen. You don't have to be flying all over. If you are serious, you set an example. And also, all the trillions and billions they make out of asset acquisition, using the currency system and the fiscal distribution and stimuluses to actually achieve that, or some of that ought to be by governments, by corporations, working together in cooperation with the people, and with the idea and intent to balance the equation in regards to the tackling climate change in the West in particular, where there are no examples like that are in Africa, where people then are employed in real green jobs, planting trees and planting it up to people's imagination what you can plant, and it depends on your geographical area and how you organise your water and how much water there is according to the sort of biodiversity you have. But there are no real problems that can't be solved by humanity. This is what I really believe, and it's not just technical, because it's also effort by humans, as history has showed many times. In Egypt, they built the pyramids because there was a community effort. It wasn't slavery. The pharaohs organised the pyramid building to keep people occupied, and the off seasons when there were floods. He had to do something. But we don't do that in the West. We have people sitting on the dole forever on welfare and becoming despondent and unhealthy, and habitually then they do less and less work, and it's not good for them, and it's not good for all sorts of it, no good for society and it, as a whole. It's not good for the health system because they become a burden upon their own health and therefore a burden upon the health system. So I'm suggesting that another approach needs to be where health is wealth and biodiversity is truly health and wealth, because it's wealth for the planet itself. Because unless you actually respect and love life itself, and this is the point, if you only love the profit, how much money you make each year, and your profit expansion, that's what you focus. That's all you're focusing on. Maybe you're missing the big picture about loving the planet itself, and that means loving life itself, and therefore you put effort into life, not just profit, which may be destructive in some ways when it does not consider balancing the environmental equation with sustainable, social, organic economics, what employs people in planting a diversity using some of the wind power and solar power to either recycle water or make new water that then is creating a biomass which takes CO2 out of the air. Because you cannot be arguing constantly in our face for years about CO2 and not be taking the CO2 out of the air, planting trees and growing a biomass, because otherwise, to me, as a very long-term environmentalist and a love for this planet and a love for life, it sounds like hypocrisy. There seems to be a very limited view in the corporate and political view on climate change, but there isn't a social organic one that's sustainable in any what makes sense from the health of the biodiversity, beyond sticking windmills up and solar panels and making EVs and all that sort of thing, where they surely are only part of the solution. Because biggest part of the problem is degradation of the land by humanity, either farming or whatever industrials, and that has to be then, I think, repatriated or redeveloped, reclaimed by using wind and solar, or some part of it, a percentage of it, to create water, to create an organic biomass which employs people at a sustainable level forever, because that's expansionary. Once you start this process and realise this is an expansionary one, it keeps going forever, then the effect of the development then is amplified. You're taking more CO2 out of the air, you're creating more biodiversity, you're enhancing the beauty of the planet and you're enhancing life on the planet, not just profits for corporations, because life on the planet, the biodiversity, is in the end the real profit for the planet itself, not just humans.